Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me here for part two of our business communication unit. And we're going to move forward here and start talking about ways to write effectively. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is striking the right tone with appropriate conversational style. Now, this can be a very delicate balance here. One of the observations I've had as a faculty member is that sometimes our students can be a little bit too conversational in their writing, particularly when submitting reports. I think it really depends on what it is that you're trying to do. So if you're sending an email in business, then you do want to be conversational because you want to make sure that that personal tone comes across. If you're putting together a memo or a report, you want to make sure that you're a little more formal and professional. Either way, we want to make sure that we are concise in what we do. You want to make sure you avoid grammatical errors. There is that spell check button on your Microsoft Word. Make sure you use that. We need to use that. If you have a red squiggly line underneath your words, that's no good. We want to check that out, figure out what's going on and get that fixed. Okay, we want to use block paragraphs when we can, when that style is appropriate. And we also want to use headings and bullets appropriately. Okay, headings and bullets, they guide the reader. Now, the reality is, and this may not be the best thing in the world, but in business, people don't always read everything you send them. So you want to make sure you've broken it down so it's easy for them to find the key points that they're looking for. Okay. Now, when we're creating verbal presentations, we want to make sure our opening grabs people's attention. Okay. You want to have something that's interesting because they're deciding in that first 2 minutes how interested they are in what it is you have to say. And if you get something that gets their attention, you're more likely that they're going to be engaged as your presentation goes on. Okay, as you get into the body of your presentation, you don't want to have more than 2 to 4 main points. People need to understand what it is that you're trying to communicate, and your structure really needs to be clear so that they can understand that. Your closing should summarize those key points. So you've put them out there in the body of the presentation, but you want to make sure that they understand that these are the key points, that they're getting the right takeaways. You also want to signal to the audience that you are wrapping up because sometimes you're going to lose people in the middle of your presentation. They're going to be zoning off a little bit. And before you summarize these key points, you want to make sure they know that you say in conclusion so that they can kind of tune in and make sure they get those if they miss something in the middle. Okay, decide how you want to handle questions. Are you going to take them throughout your talk or are you going to save them for the end? If you're taking them throughout your talk, how are you going to manage time? You got to think about all these different aspects of this, and you have to be prepared for what types of questions are going to come up. So it's very helpful sometimes to show people your presentation and see what questions they have so you know what questions to be prepared for. And then of course sometimes there's going to be questions that you're not going to have a great answer for, and you want to have kind of a canned response such as, that's a really great question. I definitely plan on looking into that. Nobody's ever asked that before. Thank you for raising it. If you want, after the talk, maybe give me your email and I'll try to get back to you with an answer on that. But you want to have a way that when you don't know, you can move forward in a positive way. Okay. Now, when we're delivering our verbal presentations, we like to use visual aids such as PowerPoint or Google presentations. PowerPoint tends to have some advantages that there can be plugins that you can put into it. Like you've seen me in class using live slides so that I can embed survey tools into PowerPoint. Google Docs is obviously free, doesn't have a cost to it, but many organizations have site licenses for PowerPoint, so that may not impact you either. You want to figure out how it is you're going to handle your nerves. Some people are more comfortable speaking in front of groups than others. I went to a presentation a few years ago that it was called Presenting in the Rough, and it was all about dealing with the challenges of presenting. One of the presenters said that when he had a big presentation coming up, the first thing he did was he got up early in the morning and went for a run because he said he realized that if he exercised early in the morning that he could kind of manage his nerves a little bit better, and that was how he dealt with that. Now that may not work for you, but what you want to do is kind of find your groove as to how do you handle your nerves and make sure you get into the right routine for that. Okay, managing hostility. Sometimes we have people in the audience who are just very, very difficult. Okay, and they can be aggressive towards content for a variety of reasons. And you want to think about, okay, how are you going to calm that down, or how are you going to cut that off politely so that you can move forward. Okay. Sometimes that comes down to, okay, sir or ma'am, I understand that you obviously don't agree with the content that I'm presenting here right now, and your point is well noted. I thank you for sharing it, but in the interest of time, I do have to move forward. So you just have to think about creative and productive ways that you can move past situations where you have hostility in the audience. Your book recommends incorporating humor and making eye contact. Eye contact, I will absolutely 100% agree with. And humor, as you know, if you listen to me, I attempt to incorporate humor quite often. Sometimes it works. Most of the time, it's a bomb. Um, either way, I still do try to bring it in there because I'm trying to grasp the audience's attention. One of the things with humor you have to be careful of, though, is that you do have to make sure that you understand the risk, because sometimes the way you intend to deliver humor isn't how it's received by the audience. Okay, and then you also want to practice your delivery and make sure it's dynamic and engaging, and figure out how it is that you're going to make that all happen. Okay, so then some tips for dynamic delivery. One is practice. You want to make sure you know your material. You don't want to memorize it word for word. I can tell you, years ago, I sort of adopted a presentation style that was laid out by Tony Hsieh, CEO of Zappos. I know I talk about Zappos way too much, but Tony Hsieh's kind of like my business idol, so I'm going to talk about him a little bit more here. And Tony talked about presenting and how nervous he used to get presenting, because he used to go in and he used to try to memorize everything word for word, and he hated that, and it wasn't him. He said, and then one day he just decided he was going to understand what his key points were, and he was going to make sure he kind of knew his material and go up, and he would let his slides kind of tell enough of a story that they would point him in a direction. And every time he told the story of a presentation, it would be a little bit different, because he would go where the moment took him. Okay, and that was his way that he knew the material but didn't memorize it. That works for some people, it doesn't work for others, and it may be more appropriate for some context than it is for others. Okay, you want to make sure you're looking directly at members of your audience. Try not to be looking at your notes too much. Try not to be looking at your slides too much. Make sure you're making eye contact with different people. Everyone in your audience should feel like you're talking personally to them. Okay, vary your voice, vary your facial expressions, vary your body language. The more you move, the more you change, the more engaging, the less monotone you're going to see. Use selective notes. Okay, this sometimes people like to have notes, sometimes people don't. That's going to be based upon your style. But when you have selective notes, you're going to have key points about bullet points and things that you want to make sure you touch on, but you shouldn't be reading word for word from them. Okay? Think about what your allotted time is. Make sure that you stick to that. I know that's something in class that we work on as we do presentations, is you get a lot of points on a presentation for just being in the right allotted time frame, right? And the idea behind that is making sure that we learn how to do that properly. If your audience is expecting a 10-minute presentation and you run to 15 or 18, they're going to lose interest, because they've already mentally passed the amount of time that they were supposed to be there for. Slow down and listen to yourself. I'm speaking really fast right now, so that's a pretty horrible example of what to do. But you want to make sure that you're hearing what you're saying, so that you know if your audience is getting it or if they don't. Don't apologize unless you did something wrong. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. Don't apologize. Again, really sorry about that. That's an example of bad humor, like I told you before. So there, they say use humor. There, I tried to use some humor, and I bet probably none of you are laughing, so that would be an example of why you want to be careful using humor. But again, try not to apologize about things, unless you really did something wrong. Maybe if you have a coughing fit or something during a presentation, you may apologize for that quickly, but don't dwell on it. Move forward. Use natural gestures. Here's the thing with natural gestures, is that if you have to think about using them, they might not be too natural, and then it might seem a little bit robotic. So be careful with that. And then, of course, we wrap it up with practice again, making sure we practice. Particularly if you're doing group presentations, you want to make sure you practice so that you know exactly how that's all going to play out in terms of timing, in terms of transitions, in terms of all these things. So I hope you all found this useful. I'm going to talk to you soon.